Sorry about the late start. Hello, and welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today, slurp, we're doing some more Destination Void by Frank Herbert. Um, yes, I do have my arrangement set up here. So previously on, uh, so there is a project to send people to the stars, theoretically to Tau Ceti. Um, to accomplish this, they are using clones of they are using crews of clones. The entire crew is their clones, um, except presumably for some people who are in the hibernation tanks that aren't, maybe. More on that later. Um, in another book entirely. But this so there have been, I think, 6 attempts at doing this, and we are now on the 7th attempt. Um, all have ended in failure, with the ship self-destructing. Um, Now, part of this is because they are given a series of problems they have to solve while they're out there, and they either fail to solve them or try to solve them, and it causes more problems than it solves. Um, More on that. More on that later. They've already given you the. I don't think that's spoiling anything, because they kind of mention it right off rip. So our band of clones is out here doing space things, and their mental organic cores, which are human brains that are used for computing power, all 3 of them have died. Well, or really gone crazy, either self-terminated or been forcibly terminated to keep from causing more damage. So right off rip, we've got brains in boxes. Um, so all of them fail. So they're now stuck. Uh, they're still flying through space, presumably towards their destination, but it's going to take a long time to get there, and they don't know what's ahead. And having a functioning ship's computer or organizing leader, where the ship is just a outgrowth of the mind, is kind of the ideal here, because to manually do all the changes they'll have to do in order to adjust gravity settings, in order to maneuver and all that, is extremely exhausting. And they might not be up to it. They might not have the reflexes to do it quick enough in order to save the ship and its crew. So their alternative to doing it by hand and possibly failing is to build a functioning artificial consciousness, which has gone very, very poorly. It cannot be overstated how poorly it has gone in the past when the experiments have been tried. Uh, there was a facility and an island in the middle of the Puget Sound where they made a rogue AI consciousness, and now there is no longer an island in the Puget Sound. It is gone. It went poof. Uh, this bodes ill for this particular plan, but it's the one they're low key being pressured towards. Um, it's the one that it's the one that Bickle is leaning towards anyway. And Bickle, we're hearing from Raja Flat. So okay, so our cast of characters, we've got, and all of their middle names are Lon because they're all clones. So we've got Raja Lon Flattery, who is the chaplain psychiatrist. Um, he's theoretically there to keep everybody on track and mostly observe, and keep everybody from having a nervous breakdown. Um, there is I, I don't know what his first name is. Tom Bickle. It's his last name's Bickle. That's mostly what you're going to hear is his last name is Bickle, and he's kind of an analytical guy. And I don't even remember his position. What are you, Bickle? I have to go through the first chapter again because I'm smart. And I forgot who he is. Sorry. Are they not going to say his... John Bickle. There we go. His name's John Bickle, and he is a... I think of him as engineering, but maybe he isn't. Anyway, we also have Gerald Lon Timberlake, who is the life systems engineer, and he's kind of a meek dude, kind of the opposite of Bickle. Bickle is very assertive. Um, Partly because one of you know what, I'm getting lost in the sauce. Anyway, there's also Prue. Prue is a doctor slash mathematician, and she's been waked from hibernation and told, hey, we just lost a bunch of people because the organic mental cores went haywire and killed them. So we need you as backup because we don't have a doctor in the house uh, or a mathematician. So thanks. And she's like, oh, okay. Um, More on that later. So one of the problems with trying to do these previously ons for a Frank Herbert novel is Frank Herbert manages to cram so much into very little space that it's very easy or very hard, as the case may be, to cover enough of what feels like enough, especially knowing how much is going to be important later that they've alluded to already but haven't really emphasized without trying to spoil anything. This is difficult. Anyway, we're going to get cracking because I had a late start and I didn't want to be this late, but things happen. So here we are. Um, let's see if I can remember the voices. That would be nice. Chapter 9. The universe is derived from an ultimate principle of spiritual consciousness, the one and only existent from eternity. Accepting this, you become an affirmer of the void, which is to be understood as the primordial nothingness, that is, the raw stuff out of which all is created, as well as the background against which every creation can be discerned. The education of a chaplain psychiatrist. Moonbase documents. It had been a tiring thing to watch. Oh, sorry. Already we're off. It had been a tiring watch, and Flattery longed to return to his quarters. He wanted to bathe himself in the field generator there, to examine the mood of the computer complex. That was one of his prime duties, to be certain that the computer had settled back into pure mechanism after being deprived of its last organic mental core. There was always the off chance that one of these attempts might achieve success by accident. But there was no way he could leave early without arousing the wrong kinds of suspicions. Well, there was another duty for the psychiatrist chaplain to perform. He looked at Bickle. You can't monitor every nuance of your machine's behavior, Flattery said. You can't be certain of every way its circuits may interact. Yeah, Bickle said. Adding all the parts doesn't give you the sum you want or need. So why wouldn't those numbskulls at UMB build their circuits around Eng multipliers? Answer me that. Timberlake glanced at Flattery, thought, go ahead, get Bickle started on that subject. He's Johnny One Note on that one. There was some mention back at UMB, Flattery said, that you were trying to get them to use trying, Bickle snarled. I practically got down on my knees and begged. They acted like I was a moron, kept saying computers only add. Even when they're multiplying, it's only series addition. They kept this up until You offered no logical circuit changes, Flattery said. That's the way I heard it. Because I didn't get the chance, Bickle said. Look, the Eng multiplier, ENG, I'm not actually sure what that is. Um, The Eng multiplier is solid state and small enough to fit into any of our miniaturization requirements. It works something like a cathode follower, so the circuit requirements aren't too weird for us to follow. It's essentially a multiplier. Depending on the circuitry, it'll take several potentials of linear, semilinear, or even nonlinear circuits, and it'll yield a potential which is the product of the inputs. It multiplies them. But what's more important, when you reverse the circuitry, you get a device that taps a circuit, divides it, mind you, at a point which varies with the load. It works like a nerve cell. The UMB team must have had good reason not to take you up on this, Prudence said. If they said I hadn't proved this was an analog of organic function, Bickle sneered. Hadn't proved it. Christ. They wouldn't even spare me computer time to work out test circuitry. Everything was tied up trying to define consciousness. You buy their definition, don't you? Flattery asked. If I did, I wouldn't have asked them to define it again, Bickle snorted. I've had about all the label juggling I can stomach. Consciousness is pure awareness, they said. Then what about the objects of consciousness? I ask. Disregard them, they say. It's pure awareness. What's awareness without an object to focus on? I ask. Not important, they say. It's pure awareness. Then they turn right around and say this pure awareness is a pattern of three primary forces. What are these primary forces? An I entity plus the organism of this entity plus everything external which could act as a stimulus plus objects. But that's not it, they say. This merely means pure awareness juggles three factors, and it's a senseless complication to try to multiply them 2 and 2 when you could add them and follow the circuits in a much more direct fashion. You're oversimplifying the argument, Prudence said. All right, I'm oversimplifying, but those are the essentials. And you had a ready answer, of course, she said. I've already told you I couldn't beg, borrow, or steal any computer time. But you insist you can prove your... Look, Bickle said. They told me I couldn't prove an organic analog, but I know I can. You just know it, she said. You can't find words to quite... When you've worked with as many with as many thought-put instrumentation and computer designs as I have, he said, you get a feeling for function. There are times when you can just look at the design of a circuit and you know immediately how it's supposed to function. You don't need the manufacturer's specifications. Do I understand you correctly? Flattery asked. You're referring to God as a manufacturer? If that's... Go ahead, Bickle snapped. Look at the design of the human cerebellum. Don't try to pick a fight with me over who designed it. Just look at it. You're a doctor. What's it suggest to you? What does it suggest to you? Flattery countered. That some potential effect is mediated there, Bickle said. This is a balancing system, very like the vestibular reflex that keeps us from falling on our asses when we walk. But the cerebellum is also a terminus, Prudence said. Cerebral output to the cerebral output to the cerebellum doesn't even stop when you're asleep, Flattery said. How can you... So the cerebellum soaks up energy like an infinite sponge, Bickle said. Energy is always pouring into it. Emotional, sensory, motor, and mental energy. Why do we blandly assume the cerebellum engages in no activity? You can't find that anywhere else in nature or in devices made by man, where a system as complicated as this just sits there and does nothing. You're arguing that the cerebellum is the seat of consciousness? Flattery asked. And you haven't defined consciousness, Prudence said. She kept her attention fixed on Bickle, hiding her excitement. His argument wasn't new, but she sensed he had a clearer understanding of where he was going with it than ever before.
Seat of consciousness? No, I'm arguing that the cerebellum could mediate consciousness, integrate it, balance it, and that consciousness is a field phenomenon growing out of three or more lines of energy. We are more than our ideas.
Prue's right, Flattery said. You're not defining it.
He glanced at Prudence, aware of her excitement and resenting it. Knowing the source of his resentment gave little solace.
But I can come at it through the back door, Bickle said.
What it's not, Prudence said.
Right, Bickle said. It's not introspection, not sensing, feeling, or thinking. These are all physiological functions. Machines can do all these things and still not be conscious. What we're hunting is a third order phenomenon, a relationship, not a thing. It's not synonymous with awareness. It's neither subjective nor objective. It's a relationship.
We're more than our ideas, Prudence said.
There's the answer to the UMB's glorified adding machines, Bickle said. It's what I kept telling them about this undefined human consciousness. When you add the inputs as a series in time, you don't always get an answer corresponding to the outputs. And since it isn't addition, it has to be a more sophisticated mathematical problem.
Timberlake, listening to Bickle, could feel the fitness intuitively. Bickle was going in the right direction, even though the landscape around them was fuzzy. We're more than our ideas. Prudence leaned back, weighing Bickle's words. He had to be given free rein, that was the directive, but he also had to feel he was being obstructed. Sensing that she had let herself get too close to the problem, she forced anger into her voice.
Damn it to hell, you still haven't defined it.
We may never define it, Bickle said, but that doesn't mean we can't reproduce it.
You want to start mocking up a prototype to test your theories? Flattery asked.
Using our communications AAT system as a basis, Bickle said.
The AAT is linked directly to the computer core, Flattery said. It's part of the translation master program. If you make a mistake, you destroy the heart of the computer. I'm not sure we should...
It'll be securely fused, Bickle said. No chance of a backlash getting through to...
Without the computer, our automatics cease functioning, Timberlake said. Maybe we'd better reconsider if...
Aw, come off that, Tim, Bickle protested. You could set up this safety system as well as I could. There's not a chance of anything getting through to the...
I keep thinking of the UMB's so-called thinking machines, Timberlake said. We can't see all their behavior. If we miss one linkage, we could upset a vital master program.
We're just not going to miss any linkages. The schematics are all available. This isn't flying blind. The AAT is the only thing we could really foul up, and at this distance from Moonbase, it's of dubious value.
Does he want to cut us off from the UMB? Flattery wondered. They suggested he might try it. We can't let him do that. If you demolished the AAT system, Flattery said, how long would it take to restore communications?
15 to 20 hours, Bickle said. We could have a jury rig doing the job by then.
Flattery looked questioningly at Timberlake. That's about right, Timberlake agreed.
We use the AAT as a basis for our simulator, Bickle said. We'll raid colony stores for reels of neuron fiber, Eng multipliers, and other basic components. What we have to get is a system that simulates human nerve net function.
But will it be conscious? Flattery asked.
All we can do is cut and try, Bickle said. Our computer and even the AAT work on analog additive principles. We're going to build a system that's strictly infinite multiplying. Our system will produce message units that are products of so many multipliers.
You make it sound so simple, Prudence said. Connect net A to net B at points D and D prime, and you get consciousness factor, CF for short.
Bickle's lips thinned. You have a better plan?
Did I push too hard? She wondered.
And she spoke quickly.
Oh, I'm with you, Bickle. You obviously know all the answers.
I don't know all the answers, Bickle growled, but I'm not going to sit out here moaning about fate, and I'm not turning back. What if we have to turn back? Flattery wondered. What do we do about Bickle's inhibition then? Are you going to wait for Moonbase to answer? Flattery asked. Bickle glanced at Prudence. I'd prefer starting at once, but that means I'd miss my shift on the board, and since I'll need Tim, we'll handle it, Flattery said. Everything seems to be running smoothly. Prudence looked up at the big board and the inactive repeaters over her couch, wondering at her sudden feeling of chill. I'm afraid to take that board, she thought. Those thousands of lives down in the hive tanks, all depending on right the first time reactions. Did the UMB big domes really know what they were doing when they sent us out here? Was this the only way? Should we dehive more people to help us? But that would overload several systems, including the Bickle system.
Chapter 10. The chase has fascinated humankind from the beginning, and with good reason. What many failed to understand, however, was that there could be the excitement of the chase even where the only thing you were chasing was an idea, a concept, a theory. As awareness developed, it became apparent that this was the most important chase of all, the one upon whose outcome all of humankind survives or fails. Raja Lawn Flattery. The Book of Ship. The creaking of their action couches, the click-click of relays, all of the subtle and familiar sounds of Com Central, worried at the edges of Prudence's awareness. For the past half hour, Bickle had been fussing through the schematics, plotting his way into the computer, sharing parts of his plan with the others. She had come to dislike the sound of the schematics being shuffled. There were tensions here that she did not fully understand, but her own role remained clear. Mediate and goad. Mediate and goad. The common stench of Com Central carried an acridity which she identified as fear. We have a chance at glory, she told herself. Very few people ever have that opportunity. It was an empty pep talk, forever confronted by that inescapable fact. I am not people. For the first time since coming out of the hive tank, she felt the old familiar pain of wonder, asking herself what it might have been like to have been born into a normal family in the normal way, to have grown up in the noisy, intimate belonging of the unchosen. You are the cream, the select few, Morgan Hempstead and his cohorts had kept reminding them. But they all knew where the cream had originated. Normal biopsy tissue from a living human volunteer had been suspended in an axolotl tank, the genetic imprint triggered, and the flesh allowed to grow. It produced an identical twin, an expendable twin. Select few, she thought. Something precious was taken from us, and the compensations were inadequate. She tuned the small screen at the corner of her board to one of the tail eyes, looked back toward the center of the solar system, toward the planet that had spawned them. A stabbing pain of homesickness tightened her breast, made breathing difficult for a moment. They had been molded and motivated, twisted, trained, and inhibited, wound up like mechanical toys and sent scooting off into the darkness with their laser whistle tooting to let UMB know where they were. And where are we? She asked herself as she blanked the screen. Prue, you'd better take the big board, Flattery said. You'd normally follow John.
Sight of the big board's dials and gauges filled her with an abrupt anger and fear. She felt the immediacy of the emotions in a dry throat, heat in her cheeks. I haven't had enough time off the board to recuperate, Flattery said, speaking hesitantly. Or I'd... It's all right, she said. I'll take it. She took a deep breath, leaned back, signed to Timberlake to begin the count.
The appeal to her nursing instinct did it, Flattery thought. She was ready to funk out. She had to take the board now, or she might never be able to face it.
Flattery glanced at Timberlake, saw the relief so apparent on the man's face as he switched the green arrow to Prudence. Timberlake, dominated by intuition, was terrified by the responsibility of Comm Central. Prudence, deep in sensation, shared that fear.
And I, because I feel their fear, overcome my own repugnance, Flattery thought.
Only Bickle, logical and with penetrating intelligence, seemed immune to these pressures. It was a flaw in Bickle's character, Flattery thought, but he knew their lives could depend on that flaw.
Get the manifest and ship-loading plans, Tim, Bickle said. I'll give you a list of what we need from Colony stores. We can set up in the computer maintenance shop next door for easy. Don't stay outside the shield area too long, Prudence said. You'd better key your dosimeters to repeaters in here. We'll keep an eye on you that way.
Right, Bickle said. He slipped off his couch, looked back at Prudence, studying her profile, the intent way she watched the big board. He shifted his attention to Flattery, who lay back with eyes closed, resting for his shift at the controls. Then to Timberlake, who was taking copies of the ship-loading plans from the computer memory bank printers.
None of them is really focused on what has to be done here, Bickle thought. They haven't faced the fact that the simulator eventually has to be tied directly to the computer. We'll just be building a set of frontal lobes, if we're successful, and our Ox can have but one source of experience upon which to come alive and conscious, the computer and its memory banks.
When they did face this fact, Bickle saw he was going to have a fight on his hands. Too much of the ship was almost totally dependent on the master programs. Juggling those programs involved a kind of all-or-nothing danger. It was a flaw in the tin egg's design, Bickle felt. He could see no logical reason for it. Why should everything on the ship depend on conscious control or intervention, even down to the robot's repair units? Prudence sensed Bickle's attention on her, saw his face reflected in a Gage's plastic cover. Oh my gosh, I don't know what happened there. There it is. Prudence sensed Bickle's attention on her, saw his face reflected in a Gage's plastic cover. His questionings, doubts, and determination were all there for her to read. Just as surely as she read the... Oh my god. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez Louise. I don't know what's going on. It's insufficient oxygen to the brain or something. Yowzer. Let's take that paragraph from the top again. I'm sorry. Prudence sensed Bickle's attention on her, saw his face reflected in a Gage's plastic cover. His questionings, doubts, and determination were all there for her to read, just as surely as she read the dial beneath the plastic reflector. She had set him up. She had done that part of her job as well as could be expected, she thought. She focused now on the total console, feeling the sensory pulses of the ship reaching outward to the hull skin and beyond. Job routine was beginning to smooth off the harsh edges of her fear. She took a deep breath, keyed a forward exterior sensor to the overhead screen, studied the star-spangled view of what lay ahead of the tin egg.
That's our prize, she thought, looking at the stars. First we clean out the Augean stables, and then we get to be first. Out there. The candy and the stick. That's the Candy, a virgin world of our own, and we have our tanks full of colonists to prove Earth's good faith. And I am the stick.
The screen view reappeared suddenly. Oh, sorry. The screen view appeared suddenly repulsive to her, and she blanked it, returned her attention to the big board and its pressures.
It's the uncertainty that gets to us, she thought. There's too much unknown out here. Something has to go wrong. But we don't know what it'll be, or when it'll hit. We only know the blow when it falls can be totally destructive, leaving not a trace. It has been before, 6 times.
She heard Bickle and Timberlake leave, the hiss of the hatch expanders sealing behind them. She turned and looked at Flattery. He had a small blue smudge stain on his cheek just below his left eye. The stain appeared suddenly as an enormous flaw in an otherwise perfect creature. It terrified her, and she turned back to the big board to hide her emotion.
Why, why did the other 6 fail? She asked.
You must have faith, Flattery said. One ship will make it, one day. Perhaps it'll be our ship.
It seems such a wasteful way, she murmured.
Very little's wasted. Solar energy's cheap at Moonbase. Raw materials are plentiful.
But we're alive, she protested.
There are plenty more where we came from. They'll be almost precisely like us, and all of them God's children. His eye is ever on us. We should—
Oh, stop that. I know why we have a chaplain, to feed us that pap when we need it. I don't need it, and I never will.
How proud we are, Flattery said.
You know what you can do with your metaphysical crap. There is no God, only— Shut up, he barked. I speak as your chaplain. I am surprised at your stupidity, the temerity that permits you to utter such blasphemy out here. Oh, yes, she sneered. I forgot. You are also our wily Indian scout, sniffing the unknown terrain in front of us. You're the hedge on our bets, the what-if factor, the—
You have no idea how much unknown we face, he said.
Right out of Hamlet, she mocked him, and allowed her voice to go heavy with portentousness. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
He felt an abrupt pang of fear for her. I'll pray for you, Prudence. And he cursed inwardly at the sound of his own voice. He had come through as a fatuous ass.
But I will pray for her, he thought.
Prudence turned back to the big board, reminding herself,
a stick is to beat people with, to goad them beyond themselves. Raj can't just be a chaplain. He has to be a super chaplain.
Flattery took a deep, quavering breath. Her blasphemy had touched his most profound doubts. And he thought how little anyone suspected what lay beneath their veneer of science, deep in that Pandora's box where anything was possible. Anything? He asked himself. That was the bind, of course. They were penetrating the frontiers of anything, and anything had always before been the prerogative of God. Oh, I have people tuning in. Hello, Warren Steele, and hello, Toby Frost. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry it's so rough today. I don't know what's going on. Chapter 11. Symbolic behavior of some order has to be a requisite of consciousness, and it must be noted that symbols abstract. They reduce a message to selected form. Morgan Hempstead, Lectures at Moonbase. Spread out that software on the bench, Tim, Bickle directed. Start by putting the pertinent parts of the loading plan on top. What? Start by putting the pertinent parts of the loading plan on top. What we need will be in. What? Okay, so I'm gonna read this word for word, and my brain is not turning this into a coherent sentence. It's like it changes sentence midway through. Midway through. Mid. I'm having a hard morning for no reason. Start by putting the pertinent parts of the loading plan on top what will need'll be need apostrophe LL need will be in robot stores. What? I'm going crazy reading this. I am absolutely losing my mind. I'm just gonna. Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's a misprint or what, but that sentence makes no sense to me.
Spread out that software on the bench, Tim, Bickle directed. Start by putting the pertinent parts of the loading plan on top what will need'll be in robot stores. I'll be with you in a minute. It looks like something an AI would have written.
I'm sorry. I don't know how I missed this before. Or I did and just was very confused by it then and forced it from my memory. Anyway, Timberlake looked at Bickle's back. Control had passed so obviously into the man's hands. No one questioned it. Now. He shrugged, began laying out the manifests and loading plans. Bickle glanced around the room. The computer maintenance shop was designed in such a way that Com Central nested partly into the curve of one wall. The shop presented one flat wall opposite Com Central, a wall about 4.5 meters high and 10 meters long. Its face covered with plug boards, comparators, simultaneous multiplexers, buffer system monitors, diagnostic instruments, dials, and telltales. Behind that wall's hardware and shields lay the first banks of master program routing that led down to core memory sections and the vast library of routines that marked out the limits of the equipment.
We'll have to block sort the system to find all the audio and visual links in the AAT bands, Bickle said. It's going to be a bootstrap operation all the way, and the only information going back into the system will have to come from us. That means one of us will have to monitor the readout at all times. We'll have to sort out the garbage as we go and keep a running check on every control sequence we use. Let's start with a gate circuit system right here.
Bickle indicated an optical character reader on the wall directly in front of him. It was all clear to him, this entrance into the problem. If only he could keep this gate of his own awareness open, one step at a time. But there remained the weight of those 6 previous failures. Reasons unknown. More than 18,000 people lost.
They don't think of us as real people, Bickle told himself. We're expendable components, easily replaced. What happened with the other 6 ships?
He wiped perspiration from his hands. The conference hookups with station personnel had served only to frustrate him. He remembered sitting at his pickup desk staring into the vid-eye screen across his ink-stained blotter, watching the movements of faces in the screen divisions. Faces he knew only in an untouchable, second-hand way. And ladies and gentlemen, we predicted Zoom calls and video conferences. The memory was dominated by Hempstead's voice issuing from that harsh, wide mouth with its even rows of teeth.
Any theory introduced to explain the loss of those ships must remain a theory at present. In the final analysis, we must admit we simply do not know what happened. We can only guess.
Guesses. System failure. Mechanical failure. Human failure. And subdivisions within subdivisions to break down the rows of guesses. But never a word of suspicion about the organic mental cores. Not one hint or theory or guess. The brains were perfect.
Why?
Bickle muttered, staring at the gauges of the computer panel. The stacked schematics on the bench rustled as Timberlake looked up.
What? Why didn't they suspect OMC failure? Bickle asked. Stupid mistake. That's too pat, Bickle protested. There's some overriding reason we weren't given all the facts. He approached the computer panel, wiped away a small smudged fingerprint. What are you getting at? Timberlake asked. Think how easy it was to keep a secret from us. Everything we did or said or breathed or ate was under their absolute control. We are the orbiting orphans, remember? Sterile isolation. The story of our lives. Sterile isolation. Physical and mental. That's not reasonable, Timberlake said. There are good reasons for sterile isolation, big advantages in a germ-free ship. But if you keep information from people who need it, well, that's not optimum. Don't you ever get tired of being manipulated? Bickle asked. They wouldn't. Wouldn't they? But what do we really know about Tau Ceti project? Bickle asked. Only what we've been told. Automatic probes were sent out. They say they found this one habitable planet circling Tau Ceti, so UMB began sending ships. Well, why not? Timberlake asked. Lots of reasons why not. You're too damn suspicious. Sure I am. They tell us that because of the dangers, they send only duplicate humans, doppelgangers. It makes sense, Timberlake said. You don't see anything suspicious in this setup? Hell no. I see. Bickle turned away from the glistening face of the computer panel, scowled at Timberlake. Then let's try another tack. Don't you find it at all difficult to focus on this problem of consciousness? On what? We have to make an artificial consciousness, Bickle said. That's our main chance. Project knows it. So do we. Do you find it difficult to face this problem? What problem? You don't think it'll be much of a problem manufacturing an artificial consciousness? Well, your life depends on solving it, Bickle said. I guess so. You guess so. Do you have an alternative plan? We could turn back. Bickle fought down a surge of anger. None of you see it. See what? The tin egg's almost totally dependent on computer function. The AAT system uses computer translation banks. All our ship's sensors are sorted through the computer for priority of presentation on Com Central screens. Every living soul in the hive tanks has an individual life support program through the computer. The drive is computer governed. The crew life systems, the shields, the fail-safe circuits, hull integrity, the radiation deflectors. Because everything was supposed to be left under the control of an OMC. Bickle crossed the shop in one low-gravity step, slapped a hand onto the papers on the bench. The movement sent several papers fluttering to the deck, but he ignored them. And all the brains on 6, no, 7 ships failed. I could feel it right in my guts. The OMCs failed, and we weren't given one word of warning. Timberlake started to speak, thought better of it. He bent, collected the schematics from the deck, replaced them on the bench. Something about the force of Bickle's words, some product of vehemence, prevented argument. He's right, Timberlake thought. Timberlake looked up at Bickle, noting the perspiration on the man's forehead, the frown lines at the corners of his eyes. We still could turn back, Timberlake said. I don't think we can. This is a one-way trip. Why not? If we headed back and had a computer malfunction, we'd still be headed home. You call diving into the sun home? Timberlake wet his lips with his tongue. They used to teach kids to swim by tossing them into a lake, Bickle said. Well, we've been tossed into the lake. We'd better start swimming, or sure as hell we're gonna sink. Project wouldn't do that to us, Timberlake whispered. Project wouldn't do that to us, Timberlake whispered. Oh, wouldn't they? But 6 ships, more than 18,000 people. People? What people? The only losses I know about are gangers, fairly easy to replace if you have a cheap energy source. We're people, Timberlake said, not just doppelgangers. To us, we're people, Bickle said. Now, I've got a real honey of a question for you. Considering all those previous ship failures and the numerous possibilities of malfunction, why didn't Project give us a code for talking about failure of OMCs, ours, or any others? These suspicions are crazy, Timberlake said. Yeah, Bickle said. We're really on our way to Tau Ceti. Our lives are totally dependent on an all or nothing computer system, quite by the merest oversight. We've aimed ships like ours all over the sky, at Dubhe, at Shadar, at Hamal, at... There was always the off chance that those other 6 ships made it. You know that. They disappeared, sure, but... now we get down to the meat. Maybe they weren't failures, eh? Maybe they...
It wouldn't make sense to send 2 Seedon ships to the same destination, Timberlake pointed out. Not if you weren't sure what was happening to...
You really believe that, Tim?
Well,
I have a better suggestion, Tim. If some crazy bastard tossed you into a lake when you couldn't swim, and you learned to swim like that, Bickle snapped his fingers, and you found then you could just keep on going, wouldn't you swim like hell to get away from the crazy bastard?
Ah, Bickle, you cynical, acerbic son of a gun. Chapter 12. Demand. Define God. OMC. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Demand. How can God contain the universe? OMC. Study the hologram. The individual is both laser and target. Fragment from message capsule number 4, thought to have originated with flattery number 4B model. In Com Central, the sounds were those... it's just a weird line break. In Com Central, the sounds were those the umbilicus crew had come to accept as normal. The creak of action couches in their gimbals, the click of an occasional relay as it called attention to a telltale on the big board.
Has Bickle unburdened himself at all about the Artificial Consciousness Project back at UMB? Prudence asked.
She removed her attention momentarily from the master console, glanced at Flattery, her sole companion on the lonely watch. Flattery appeared a bit pale, his mouth drawn downward in a frown. She returned her attention to the console, noting on the time log that her ship watch had a little more than an hour yet to run. The strain was beginning to drag at her energy reserves. Flattery was taking a hell of a long time to answer, she thought, but he was famous for the ponderous reply.
he said a little, Flattery said,
and he glanced at the hatch to the computer maintenance shop where Bickle and Timberlake were working.
Prue, shouldn't we be listening in on them, making sure they...
Not yet, she said.
They wouldn't have to know we were listening.
You underestimate Bickle, she said. That's about the worst mistake you can make. He is fully capable of throwing a trace meter onto the communications, as I have, just on the off chance something interesting will turn up, like finding us listening.
Do you think he started building?
Mostly preparation at this stage, she said. They're collecting material. You can pretty well follow their movements by watching the power drain here on the boards, the shifts in temperature sensors and the dosimeter repeaters, and the drain on the Robox cargo handlers.
They've been out to the cargo sections?
One of them has. Probably Tim.
You know what Bickle said about the UMB attempt? Flattery asked.
He paused to scratch an itch under his chin.
Said the biggest failure was in attention,
The experts wandering away, doing everything but keeping their attentions on the main line.
That's a little too warm for comfort, she said.
He may suspect, Flattery said, but he can't be certain.
There you go, underestimating him again.
Well, at least he is going to need our help, Flattery said, and we'll be able to tell what's going on from how he needs us. Are you sure he needs us? He'll have to use you for his deeper math analysis, Flattery said. And me, well, he's going to be plowing through the von Neumann problem before he gets much beyond the first steps. He may not have faced that yet, but he'll have to when he realizes he has to get deterministic results from unreliable hardware. She turned to stare at him, noting the faraway look in his eyes. How's that again? He has to build with non-living matter. So what? She returned her attention to the board. Nature makes do with the same stuff. Living systems aren't living below the molecular level. And you underestimate life, Flattery said. The basic elements Bickle has to use are from our robot stores. Reels of quasi-biological neurons in solid-state devices, Nerex wire and things like that. All of it non-living at a stage far above the molecular. But their fine structure's as relevant to their function as any living matter's is. Perhaps you're beginning to see the essential hubris in even approaching this problem, Flattery said. Oh, come off that, Chaplain. We're not back in the 18th century making Vaucanson's wonderful duck. We're tackling something much more complex than primitive automata, but our intention's the same as Vaucanson's. That's absolutely not true, Prudence said. If we succeeded and took our machine back to Vaucanson's time and showed it to him, he'd just marvel at our mechanical ability. You miss the mark. Poor Vaucanson would run for the nearest priest and volunteer for the lynch mob to do away with us. You see, he never intended to make anything that was really alive. It's only a matter of degree, not basic difference, she protested. He was like Aladdin rubbing the lamp compared to us, Flattery said, and even if his intentions were the same as ours, he wasn't aware of it. You're talking in circles. Am I really? This is the thing that writers and philosophers have skirted for centuries with their eyes half averted. This is the monster out of folklore, Prue. This is Frankenstein's poor monster and the sorcerer's apprentice. The very idea of building a conscious robot can be faced only if we recognize the implicit danger that we may be building a golem that'll destroy us. In your off hours, you tell ghost stories. Laughter's as good a way as any of facing this fear, he said. You're really serious, she accused. Never more serious. Why do you suppose Project's so happy to send us far out into space to do our work? She tried to swallow in a dry throat, realized she was afraid. Flattery had touched a nerve. He had produced a powerful truth from somewhere. She forced herself to face this as a fact when she felt an urge to call the computer shop and beg Bickle and Tim to stop whatever they were doing. The urge sent a chill along her spine. Where do we draw the line between what's living and what's inanimate? Flattery asked. He studied her, seeing the fatigue shadows under her eyes, the trembling of a nerve at her temple. Will our creature be alive? She cleared her throat. Wouldn't it be more to the point to ask if our creature will be able to reproduce itself? If there's any danger, any real danger to... Then indeed we may be on forbidden ground. And he wondered why this thought always brought such an empty feeling in the pit of his stomach. Oh, for God's sake, Raj! Prudence was vehement. Have you completely forgotten that you're a scientist? For God's sake, I can never forget it. For God's sake, I can never forget it, he said quietly. Stop that! She realized her voice unconsciously had assumed the peremptory tone of her dormitory mother back in the UMB creche. Dormitory mother! A gray-haired image whose touch was never more than the padded flexor of a robot which she directed from some remote sanctuary in Project Central. Such a sad woman she'd been, so cynical and remote. Religion makes demands that can't be denied unless you're willing to pay a terrible price, Flattery said. Religion's just a fact like any other, Prue countered. We investigate primitive religions. Why can't we investigate our own? Didn't God make us curious? Oh, who is saying what now? Is this back and forth? Yes. Okay, good. It is her. We investigate primitive religions. We investigate primitive religions. Why can't we investigate our own? Didn't God make us curious? Aren't we as scientists supposed to put ourselves beyond the reach of prejudice? Only a fool imagines he's beyond the reach of his prejudices. Well, I prefer to be a Calvinist. I'm willing to be damned for the greater glory of God. You mustn't say such things, he snapped. He put a hand to his head, thinking, I mustn't let her goad me this way. You can't show me anything I mustn't say, she said. You claim scientists can equate God with ideas of mathematical infinity. We manipulate mathematical infinity. Why can't we manipulate God? What silly pretensions, he said. Mathematical infinity. 0/0, eh? Or infinity minus infinity? Or infinity times 0? God times 0, she said. Why not? You're the mathematician, he said, his voice pouncing. You know better than anyone that these are indeterminate forms, mathematical nonsense. God minus infinity. Mathematical nonsense. He glared at her. His his throat felt dry and burning. She'd tricked him into this corner. It was blasphemy, and he was more vulnerable than she was. Guiltier. You're supposed to be doing this to me, aren't you? He accused. You're supposed to push me and test me, give me no peace. I know. How little he knows, or even suspects, she thought. Infinity doesn't follow the conditions of number or quantity. If there's a God, I don't see why he should follow those conditions either. As for testing you, horseradish, all you need's an occasional kick in the philosophy. Stick to my preaching and let you play with the math, is that it? There's no blasphemy in developing a new kind of calculus or any other new tool to deal with our universe, she said. Our universe? Flattery asked. As much of it as we can take, she said. That's the whole idea of a colony ship, isn't it? Is it? He asked. She adjusted the coarse constant repeater, said, I'll stick to math. How about a calculus that goes beyond the limits of x over y as they tend toward infinity? That should be possible. Creating a new kind of calculus and building this living, sentient creature aren't the same, he said. Without the calculus, we may never achieve the creature. She keeps trying to corner me, he thought. Why? The issue's whether we're intruding on God's domain of creation. You holy joes are all alike. You want to glorify God, but you'd limit the means. Flattery stared at the curved gray metal of the bulkhead above him, seeing the tiny imperfections in the crackle pattern of its finish. He felt he was being maneuvered. She was stalking him the way a man might stalk game. Was it his soul she was after? He sensed he was in profound danger, that the idea of consciousness as something they could create might inflict itself on his soul as an incurable wound. He put a hand to his mouth. I cannot permit her to bait me and tempt me. Raj, she whispered, and there was terror in her voice. He whirled toward her, seeing the streaks of light across the big board like red knife slashes. We're almost at red line temperature in sector C8 of the Hybe tanks, she said. Everything I do seems to make the system oscillate. Flattery's hands flashed out to the life system's repeater switches, brought his own monitors alive. He scanned the instruments, commanded. Call Tim. Nothing I do seems to work, she panted. He glanced at her, saw she was fighting the board, not working with it. Call Tim, he said. She hit the command circuit switch with the heel of her left hand, shouted, Tim to comm central! Emergency!
Again, Flattery scanned his instruments. There appeared to be 3 points of temperature shift outside the Hybe tanks with corresponding variation inside. As Prue tried to compensate for one fluctuation, the others fell farther toward the red. He had to force himself to keep his hands off the controls. If tank temperature went into the red without dehybe precautions, there'd be deaths among the helpless occupants. Despite Prue's desperate efforts, death was approaching 3 sectors of the C8 tank, some 400 human lives in there. The hatch from the computer shop banged open. Timberlake leaped through with Bickle right behind.
"Hype tanks," Prudence gasped. "Temperature."
Timberlake threw himself across Com Central into his action couch. His vac suit rasped against the cocoon lips as he turned, grasped the traveler controls.
"Give me the red switch," he snapped. "To hell with the count. I'm taking it."
And he took it, the big board swinging across much too fast.
"C8," she said, sinking back and wiping perspiration from her forehead.
"I've got it,"
he said. He scanned the dials and gauges, his fingers playing over the console. Bickle slipped into his own couch, tripped his repeaters.
"It's in the hull shielding," he said. "First 2 layers," Timberlake said.
Prudence put a hand to her throat, tried not to look at Bickle.
"He mustn't suspect our attention's on him," she thought. Then, wouldn't it be monstrous irony to lose our colonists and burden ourselves with guilt before the need for it?
"That's doing it,"
Bickle said. She looked across the board, above Timberlake, saw the warning telltales winking out, the dials swinging back into normal range.
"Faulty feedback for a patch of our shell reflectors focused on C8," Timberlake said. "The system started to oscillate and that threw the overload switches, left us wide open."
"Another design failure," Bickle sneered.
And such a simple problem, Bickle thought. The hull curve acted like a lens to focus energy within the ship. Unless the reflector and shell shielding systems compensated. Prudence traced the line of the remaining telltales.
"C8's on a line with that robot stores section you raided. Is that all it takes to throw the ship off balance?"
"Gives you a wonderful feeling of confidence in the Tin Egg's design, doesn't it?" Bickle said.
"They didn't warn me," she thought. "They cheated. Calculated emergencies, they said. Just enough to keep a fine edge on your reaction abilities. Reaction abilities!"
"You overcompensated, Prue," Timberlake said. "Make minimal adjustments to avoid oscillation while you hunt for the source of your trouble. You had sensor telltales flaring right out through the ship to pinpoint where you needed shielding reinforcement."
"I panicked," she thought. "I guess I let myself get too tired."
Even as she spoke, she sensed how lame the excuse sounded.
"I was too intent on doing the job on Flattery," she thought. "I had him headed for a nice corner where he'd have to fight his way out, and I missed the ship trouble until it was almost ready to wreck us."
It occurred to her then to wonder if one of the crew had her as a special project to keep her abilities toned up, on edge.
"Prue, you've got to remember that when the overload switches go, the computer automatics are out of the circuit," Bickle said. "This thing was designed to be brought back into line by a conscious intelligence, one of us or an OMC."
"Oh, shut up!" she flared. "I made a mistake. I know it. I won't do it again."
"No damage was done," Timberlake said.
"I don't need you to defend me," she snapped. And she thought, "No damage. Nothing was harmed except one of the crew. Me."
She pressed her hands together to still their trembling.
"We're sitting ducks for any real emergency. We can't turn back without the risk of a runaway dive into Sol or becoming another of her wandering comets. We can't go on unless we solve the unsolvable."
"Take it easy, Prue," Flattery soothed. "We probably put you on the big board too soon after getting you out of Hybe."
"Thanks for the excuse," she thought.
Flattery glanced around the room, seeing the poised silence of Bickle and Timberlake, both of them scorched by Prue's anger.
Bickle slid out of his couch, secured a set of test leads in the clip at his left shoulder. A multimeter could be seen protruding from his breast pocket. Timberlake was refining the hull temperature adjustments, putting the system back into the computer circuits. Flattery returned his attention to Prudence. She shouldn't have panicked, he thought. Not the type. She has a woman's wide perspective and confidence in her intuition. She should be better at the big board than any of us. Is she under greater strain? Does she know something I don't?
Sorry, one sec, just grabbing water. Chapter 13.
We understand synergy to mean the fortuitous working together of a set of components which we have assembled in our attempt to achieve artificial consciousness. Working together, the components produce more than
Prudence Lawn Weigand, number 3. Incomplete segment from message capsule. It required almost 20 minutes for Prudence to regain her composure. By that time, Timberlake had run a checklist survey on every Hybe tank complex. He did it with a compulsive determination that none of them had misunderstood. His function as life systems engineer had been ignited. Flattery let the thing run its course and a bit longer. Bickle was fretting to get back to his work, but Timberlake needed this role reinforcement, and Prudence needed recovery time. Bickle finally had enough waiting.
Can we get back to work? He demanded.
I can take the board now, Tim, Flattery said. Timberlake studied his instruments. Okay, on the count. They shifted the board, and Timberlake sat up, a sharp ache across his back telling him how tense he had been.
Let's get back to the shop,
Bickle said.
How far along are you?
Prudence asked.
Barely beginning,
Bickle said.
Let's get cracking.
Is a man just a machine's way of making another machine? She asked.
Just like Sam Butler's hen, Timberlake said. Philosophy 1. Philosophy some other time, huh?
Bickle suggested. Just a minute, she said. By attempting to reproduce an artificial consciousness, we are monkeying with variation of variability. Now, there's a field that all good little divines, she nodded toward Flattery, and most scientists have agreed by a compact of silence is the exclusive territory of God in heaven and God's handiwork on earth, the genes.
Yeah, Bickle said. That's great. Let's solve it some other time.
You don't get it, none of you, she said.
Bickle glared at her.
Don't I? Okay, Prue, let's strip off the fancy verbiage. We're damned if we solve this problem and dead if we don't. Is that what you're trying to say?
Bravo, she said, and turned to look at Flattery. Flattery scowled at his board, pointedly ignoring her. You see, Raj? She asked. She can't possibly know my instructions, Flattery thought. She might guess, but she can't know, and certainly she couldn't stop me if I had to blow us all to kingdom come. Yes, I see, Flattery said. Don't underestimate John Lon Bickle. It might be Lone, because it's clones.
I don't know. At the sound of his name, Bickle's head came up. He stared at Flattery's profile, seeing the way the man's sensitive fingers moved like spider legs across the big board.
You're so very clever, Raj, she said, and so damn stupid.
That's enough of that, Bickle snapped, turning to glare at Prudence. We'd better clear a little air here. We're on our own, Prue. You've no idea how much on our own we are. We have to depend on each other because we sure as hell can't depend on the tin egg. We can't afford to snap and bite at each other.
Oh, can't we now? She thought.
We're trapped on a ship that contains only one top drawer mechanism, Bickle said. We've only one thing that functions smoothly and beautifully the way it should, our computer. Everything else works as though it had been designed and built by 6 left-handed apes.
Bickle thinks this was all deliberate, Timberlake said. Prudence caught herself in an involuntary glance at Flattery, forced her attention away from Bickle and onto Timberlake.
This is far too early for Bickle to suspect, she thought.
Timberlake avoided her eyes. He looked like a small boy who'd been caught stealing jam. Flattery broke the silence. Deliberate? He asked. Yeah, Timberlake said. He thinks the other 6 ships had the same kind of failure. Something rotten with the OMCs.
Bickle's far more alert and suspicious than anyone suspected, Prudence thought. Raj or I will have to side with him. There's no other way to keep control of the situation.
Why the OMCs? Flattery asked.
Let's not tiptoe around it, Bickle said. The thing's obvious. What feature of these ships is never mentioned in the stress analyses? What feature do we assume is proof against failure?
Surely not the OMCs, Flattery said. He tried to hold his voice to a bantering level, failed, and thought, God help us, Bickle's seen through the sham far too soon.
Certainly the OMCs, Bickle said, and they gave us 3 of the damn things. 1 in service and 2 for backup. Never a hint that an OMC could fail, yet we had 3 on the tin egg.
Why? Prudence asked.
To make damn sure we got beyond the point of no return before we got the cold turkey treatment, Bickle said.
I guess I'm elected, Prudence thought. She said, more of the project's goddamn maneuvering. Sure, it'd be right in character.
Flattery shot a startled look at her, returned his attention to the big board before Bickle noticed.
Cold turkey, Bickle said. The ship's one elaborate simulation device with a single purpose, and my guess is the others were the same.
Why? Why? Flattery demanded. Why would they do such a thing? Why would they do such a thing? I swear I am not. I am not a book-reading AI who cannot get emphasis on the right syllable. I am so sorry. Why would they do such a thing? Sorry. Sorry, just a little manic. Oh no. Why? Flattery demanded. Why would they do such a thing?
Can't you see it? Bickle asked. Don't you recognize the purpose? It casts its shadow over everything around us. It's the only thing that makes any sense out of this charade. The secrecy, the mystery, the maneuvering, everything's calculated to put us on a greased slide into a very special ocean. It's not just cold turkey, it's sink or swim. And the only way we can swim is to develop an artificial consciousness.
Then why such an elaborate sham? Flattery asked. Ah, come on. Sorry about that.
Then why such an elaborate sham? Flattery asked. Why all the colonists, for example? Why not the colonists? Bickle countered. Ready replacements for any members of the crew slaughtered on the way. Another arrow in the quiver, just in case we do get over the hump to a habitable planet where we can plant the seed of humankind. And maybe there's another reason. What? Prudence demanded. I can't say just yet, Bickle said. It's just a hunch, and there's something a hell of a lot more important we have to consider. The destructive potential of this project.
You'd better explain that, Flattery said, but he could feel the dryness but he could feel the dryness of his throat and mouth that Bickle already had seen through to the horror element of Project Consciousness.
Let's not kid ourselves, Bickle said. If we really solve this, the whatever you call it we develop could be a kind of ultimate threat to humankind. A rogue Frankenstein's monster, cold intelligence without warm emotions, an angry horror. He shrugged. Once there was an island in Puget Sound. You all know about it. What happened? Did they solve it?
So we install inhibitions, failsafe features, Prudence said.
How? Bickle asked. Can we develop this consciousness without giving it free will? Maybe that was the original problem with our Creator, giving us consciousness without permitting us to turn against what? God?
Consciousness, the gift of the serpent, Flattery thought. He wet his lips with his tongue. So,
So, this ship has an ultimate fail-safe device to protect Earth and the rest of humanity, Bickle said. The only sure one I can think of, given all the variables, is a human being, one of us. He looked at each of them. One of us is set to pull the pin and blow us all to hell if we go sour.
oh, come now, Flattery said.
It could be you, Bickle said. Probably is. But maybe you're too obvious.
Prudence put a hand to her breast, thought,
Holy Jesus, I never once considered that. But Bickle's right. And it is Raj, of course. He's the only one that fits. What do I do now?
Timberlake stirred out of a deep silence. He had heard the argument, and the only thing that surprised him was how easy it was to accept Bickle's summation. Why was Bickle right? He was right, of course, but why did they accept it when the thing really wasn't that obvious? Was it awe of Bickle, clearly the strongest mind among them? Or was it that they already knew the facts, unconsciously?
I tell you something, Timberlake said. Bickle's right and we know it. So one of us is set to pull the pin. I don't want to know who. No argument, Bickle said. Whoever it is, if this thing goes sour, I'd be the last person in the tin egg to stop him.
Oh, good morning to Optical Antenna and Derpy Shark. My apologies for how rough this is going. it's it's getting better now that we're most of the way through our segment. And phone calls aside. Chapter 14. The Zen master tells us that an omnipresent idea can be hidden by its own omnipresence, the forest lost among the trees. In our normal daily behavior, we are most estranged, most in the grip of an illusory idea of the self. Every enchanting inclination of pride and its ego, of convention and its master, social training, conspires to maintain the illusion. The semanticist calls it the inertia of old premises, and this is what holds our analyses of consciousness within fixed limits. She wrote, Prudence Lawn Wagand, at the foot of the log tape, started it rolling through the auto-recorder, made the synchronous shift to Flattery's tape as he took over the board. The counter said it was her 35th change of shift. Flattery squirmed in his couch, settling himself for the 4-hour watch. Reflections on the dial faces were hypnotic. He shook his head to bring himself to full alertness, heard the hiss of fabric as Prudence got out of her couch. She stood there a moment stretching, did a dozen deep knee bends. How easily they accept the possibility that I'm the executioner, Flattery thought. He noted how wide awake and alert Prudence appeared. This 4 hours on, 4 hours off routine could be endured as long as no serious problems arose, but it played hob with the metabolic cycle. Prudence should be headed for food and rest, but she obviously was wide awake. She glanced at Flattery, saw he was settled in for the watch, checked the repair log. Nothing was flagged urgent. That made it a bit more than 25 hours with nothing more than minor adjustments on the big board. Smooth. Too smooth. Danger keeps you honed to a fine edge, she thought. Extended peace makes you dull. But she wondered if Project had anticipated the special danger she had found for herself, and she thought, am I the stick to beat not only the others, but myself? The line of her own research seemed so obvious, though. Define the chemical sea in which consciousness swam. The ultimate clue lay, she thought, in the serotonin-adrenaline fractions. The thing she sought was an active principle, something between synhexyl and noradrenaline, a flash producer of neurohormones. The end product would be the root stimulator of human consciousness. Find that chemical analog and she could give fine detail to the workings of consciousness, provide a point-to-point sequencing which they could follow with machine simulation. On the course she had chosen, the dangers to her person were enormous. She had no other guinea pig upon whom to test the derivatives her ingenuity produced. The possibility of deadly error was always present. The last substance, a relative of cohoba with an extra nitrogen addition, had ignited her mind, transported her into a weird consciousness. All sounds had become liquids, which merged within her to be translated by a centrifuge process of awareness. It had been a terrifying experience, but she refused to stop. Back in my day, man, all we did was eat some psilocybin. Smoke some psilocybin. I guess you could. Man, we just had magic mushrooms, man. It was only possible to make the tests during the deep rest periods in her own private cubby, and there was always the possibility some physical response would betray her. She could not afford that. The others would unite to prevent the tests, she knew. Such was their conditioning. You'd better get something to eat and try to rest, Flattery said. I'm not hungry. At least try to rest. Maybe later. I think I'll wander in and see how Bickle and Tim are doing. She looked at the big screen overhead. It was tuned to the peak corner lenses of the computer shop. We have to have a constant monitor on each other, Timberlake had argued. We can't wait for somebody to yell help. The screen showed Bickle alone in the shop, but another eye had been keyed. It showed Timberlake asleep in his cubby adjoining the shop. 4 hours on and 4 hours off, plus this constant looking over each other's shoulders, will have us batty in a week, she thought. Bickle looked up to his own screen eye, saw Prudence watching, said, Satan finds mischief for idle hands. They mock me, Flattery thought. They laugh at God, at the devil, at me. How about some coffee? Prudence asked, speaking to Bickle. Coffee later, he said. No more food of any kind in here, anyway. We have to keep the cover plates open, and we can't risk contaminating the fine structure. If you're free, I could use some help. She took one low-grav step across to the latch. Bleh. She took one low-grav step across to the hatch lock, let herself through, stopped just inside the shop to study what Tim and Bickle had accomplished since her last free period. Where the optical character reader had been, on the big panel across from the lock, now stretched a mechanical excrescence, a piled and jutting structure of plastic blocks. Eng multiplier circuits, each sealed in plastic insulator. Linking the blocks were loops and tangles and twists, a black spider web of insulated pseudo-neuron fiber. Bickle had heard her entrance. Without turning from his work at one end of that protruding angular construction, he said, "Take that other micro-tie viewer on the bench. I need 21.006 centimeters of the K-A4 neurofiber with random spaced end bulbs and multi-synapses. Connected as I've indicated on that schematic labeled G20. It should be the top one in that pile on the right end of the bench." Bickle sat down on the deck, slid a new block of Eng multipliers into position. He swung a portable micro-tie viewer across the block, leaned into the viewer's forehead rests, began making the connections. Yes, sir, she thought. She found the indicated schematic, reeled off the neurofiber, fed it into the viewer, bent to the eyepiece. The enlarged image of the conductor line with its green-coated synapse sections and yellow end bulbs leaped into view. She looked once more at the schematic, began making the required connections. "What are we doing now, boss?" she asked. "Installing a system of roulette cycles," Bickle said. "Why?" "A machine can reproduce any form of behavior," Bickle said. "We can engineer this device to satisfy any given input-output specifications. It'll behave any way we want under any specified circumstances. Raj set me straight on that." She kept her tone light. "That was wrong, huh?" "You bet your sweet life." Specified environment and behavior, that's deterministic. The manufacturer is still in control. What's worse, it requires a completely detailed memory. Everything in the machine's past has to be immediate, right there and now. Memory load gets bigger and bigger every second, and it's all present and immediate, and that throws you into an infinite design problem. She reeled off a required length of side fiber, made the loop indicated in the schematic. "Infinite design. That means an indeterminate form, and, by definition, the indeterminate is impossible to construct. So what do we do now?" "Don't be dull," Bickle said. "We build for a random inhibitory pattern in the net, behavior that follows probability requirements." He leaned back from his viewer, wiped perspiration from his forehead. "A behavior pattern that results from built-in misfunction." The way this ship was programmed to behave for us, she thought. "Deterministic behavior from unreliable elements," she said, and she sensed Flattery's hand in this, an argument, a gentle nudge. "Bickle," she said, "I've been stewing about your suspicions. Even if you're right about one of us being set to blow us up if we go sour, how can you be sure this failsafe person is still among us? I mean, 3 of the original crew are dead." "Okay," Bickle said. "Let's say we brought you out of Hybe and you found our chaplain psychiatrist had been killed. What were your orders?" "Orders?" "Come off that. We all had special orders." "I'd have insisted we bring another chaplain psychiatrist out of Hybe," she said in a small voice. "What would you have done?" "I had my orders, same as you." She looked up at Flattery visible on the overhead screen. He appeared intent on the big board, paying no attention to the conversation coming over the intercom from the shop. That was a sham, she knew. Everything said here was going into his brain, being weighed and analyzed. Bickle's right, she thought. It's Raj. "Pay attention to what you're doing," Bickle said. She turned, saw him watching her. "You foul up the ties on that loop and I'll put you back in Hybe," he said. "Don't make threats you can't carry out," she said. but she turned back to the micro-tie viewer, finished off an inter-ringed series of loops, tested to be sure they weren't mutually oscillating, traced the output sheaf, and attached a plug for an Eng multiplier connection.
Let me have that G20 assembly as soon as you're finished, Bickle said. He yawned, put his knuckles to his eyes.
Prudence checked her assembly against the schematic, saw it matched, lifted it gently out of the viewer, and took it to Bickle. He was overdue for a rest, and still driving himself, she saw.
Here, she said, presenting the assembly. When you get this tied in, why don't you take a break?
We're almost ready to put this on an initial program, Bickle said.
He took the assembly, began connecting it to the newly installed Eng multiplier block, running one sheaf back to a plug board connection on the computer panel. Prudence stepped back, studied the mechanical growth that jutted from the wall. As though she saw it for the first time, the construction abruptly took on a new meaning for her.
That's more than a setup for analysis, she said.
That's right.
Bickle stood up, wiped his hands on the sides of his vac suit, swung his own micro-manipulator and viewer to one side.
This, in addition to giving us our analysis of built-in misfunction, this little aux we're driving will provide a three-way energy interchange.
You're tied into the computer, she accused,
pointing to the connections in the plug board.
Every line in that board has a diode in it. Pulses can come from the computer to our test setup, but anything going into the computer has to be coded by one of us and inserted over there.
Bickle pointed to the input heads lined up at the right corner of the wall.
Three-way interchange? She asked.
We're going to test my field theory approach. I have a source program ready to insert. If our aux doesn't work, it'll just produce an unconditional transfer of the material at the readout. If the field is produced, it'll act as a filter, and we'll get truncation. It'll pass only the significant digits.
What about the roulette cycles?
The zero suppress will be intermittent, he said, but we'll still get only the significant digits at the readout.
Prudence nodded, looking at Bickle with a new understanding of what he was doing.
All sense data are intermittent into the human consciousness.
It was an explosive thought.
Waveforms. Everything which consciousness could identify had to move in some organized way. It had to move against a background which outlined the organization. Therefore, intermittence. And Bickle had seen right through to this necessity.
She found the realization somehow deeply sexual, and awareness of this filled her with disquiet. There was no way she could include anti-S on her present testing regimen. She wondered if her body might finally betray her. Forcing herself to a calmness which she did not feel, she said,
"What we see and identify has to be discrete and significant. It has to dance against some other background."
Now you have it, Bickle said, but we assume that the one who views the data is continuous, a flow of consciousness. Somewhere inside us, the discrete becomes amorphous. Consciousness weeds out the insignificant, focuses only on the significant.
I think I misread that.
Consciousness weeds out the insignificant, focuses only on the significant.
That's judgment, she said, and it's where physicalist theory falls flat on its face. If this is an introspection device, then it won't be conscious. Introspection confuses consciousness with thinking. But sensing, feeling, and thinking are physiological processes, and consciousness
is something else, Bickle said. It's a relationship, a field, a selective interchange. It drops the insignificant digits. It's a weeder. Now we see if we have a device that can weed on the basis of intermittent data, some of which is erroneous.
Erroneous data, significant results, she whispered.
What?
But she ignored Bickle to turn and look at the overhead screen where Flattery was revealed calmly monitoring the big board. Something Flattery had said now came into her mind as though it had been amplified to full volume. There's nothing concerning ourselves about which we can be truly objective, except our physical responses.
the reflections of behavior. We exist in a forest of illusion, where the very concept of consciousness merges with illusion. She turned to look at Bickle where he worked, seeing the stretch of his muscles under the vac suit fabric as he bent to finish the assembly. And she thought, to be conscious, you must surmount illusion. Bickle saw that where I didn't. A moment of illumination filled her mind, and she saw the man at his work as more than flesh and sinew and nerves, more than the physical chemistry with blanks to be filled in. Bickle was both a minuscule and vulnerable creature, but beyond that he contained powers that could stretch across any universe. Something of this momentary understanding struck her as almost religious, holy. She savored it, realizing this was a private and personal thing she could never completely communicate to another creature. Bickle finished the final tie of the G20 assembly, stood up, and rubbed the small of his back. His hands trembled as he relaxed after the fierce concentration of the work he had just completed. "Let's give it a run," he said. "Prue, you monitor the diagnostic board." He gestured to the panel of dials and gauges waiting like so many glistening eyes at his left. "I'll give each net of the roulette cycles a 1/5 second burst from the shot generator." He moved around to the right of the piled blocks of the test setup, stepping over the leads with elaborate care. He flipped the rows of switches to start the source program through the inputs. "Mark," he said. "Mark," she said, as her dial needle snapped over to register the pulse. "Give me the mean synapse threshold, mean end bulb threshold, and action time on each net." Bickle depressed 3 switches simultaneously. "Interchange activated." He waited, feeling the suspense grow, a tightness in his stomach. "Interchange now showing entrance pulse," she said. "Net 1," he said, introducing the timed burst from the shot generator. "There's a jam up at the 5th layer nodes," she said. She concentrated on the gauges for the 5th layer as though her thoughts could activate them, but they remained at 0. "No impulses are getting through," she said. "I'll try sweeping the roulette cycles," Bickle said. He twisted a dial. "Nothing," she said. Bickle kicked off his row of switches, moved the jacks to the left. "Here, let's try a trigonometrically oscillating potential in the loops. Give me the new readings for each layer of the nets. Mark 1. Holy shit, I actually read that correctly. Pardon me. You try getting caught unawares with trigonometrically oscillating potential in the loops. You try it. Huh? Huh? Out of nowhere. Huh? Jeez. I am good. I don't care what they write about me on the bathroom wall. Actually, I think on the bathroom wall they imply very heavily that I am quite good indeed. But never mind, that's neither here nor there. Ahem. "You're getting a nonlinear reaction across all the nets now," she said. "It's close to 0 linearity." "That can't be," Bickle said. "These things are still open circuits no matter what we call them." He depressed another switch. "Read the other nets." Prudence suppressed a sense of frustration, swept her gaze across the dials. "Nonlinear," she said. Bickle stepped back, glared at the input panel. "This is nuts. What we have here is essentially a transducer. The outputs should match." Again Prudence read her dials. "Your products are still 0. "Any heat?" Bickle asked. "Nothing significant," she said. Bickle pursed his lips, thinking. "Somehow we've produced a unitary orthogonal system for each net and the total It's a page flip, sorry. Somehow we've produced a unitary orthogonal system for each net and the total assembly," he said. "And that's a contradiction. It could mean we have more than one system in each of these separate nets." "You have an unknown that's swallowing energy," Prudence said, her excitement kindling. "Isn't that our definition of—" "It isn't conscious," Bickle said. "Whatever the unknown system is, it can't be conscious. Not yet. This setup is too simple. It doesn't have enough source data." "Then it's some error in the hookup," Prudence said. Bickle's shoulders sagged.
He took a deep, tired breath.
Yeah, has to be.
Where's your record of assembly and circuit tests? Prudence asked.
I isolated an auxiliary storage tank, Bickle said. He gestured vaguely to his left. It's the red flagged one. Everything's in there, including all this. He waved at the diagnostic panel.
You get something to eat and take a rest break, she said. I'll start tracing circuits.
We got a jam up on the direct test, Bickle said. It wasn't an open circuit reaction, and the net interchange test produces 0 at the output without flagging the point of loss. The thing's a goddamn sponge.
It'll be some simple error, she said. Wake Tim and send him in while you're at it. And send him in while you're at it. He's had more than his 4 hours off.
I am tired, Bickle admitted.
He thought back, asking himself how long it had been since he had rested. 3 full watches, anyway.
I let myself get too tired, he thought. I know better. This is exacting work. Going too long without a break is the surest way to make mistakes. It'll be some simple thing, he said,
but he knew as he said it that this was wrong. Sleep. He needed sleep. Bickle headed toward quarters, pawing at the problem in his mind, rolling it over. The setup produced a contradictory reaction. Nothing simple was going to produce that complex a contradiction. Behind him, Prudence activated the readouts at the red-flagged portion of the panel, started getting the feel of the setup. Sometimes with these computer problems, she knew, you could move intuitively into the area of difficulty, save yourself hours of hunting. Certain parts of a setup would feel wrong. Presently, Timberlake joined her, yawning. Bick told me. Trouble.
Odd trouble.
So I gathered. He cleared his throat. Exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. She told him about the tests, the jam-up at the fifth-layer nodes, and the subsequent disagreement between input and output. Zero linearity? He asked.
Almost.
And no heat?
Nothing showed on the sensors.
Timberlake looked at the readout, the panel on both sides. This is the storage tank we isolated. Have you examined the whole procedure?
I was just getting acquainted with the setup when you came in.
That thing should have worked, Timberlake said. It was a clean, straightforward construction all the way. I could have sworn it was going to give us that integrated readout and remove the non-significant digits, and we could just go on from... He paused, then said, unexpected feedback might cause the thing to react the way it did.
I don't follow you.
An oscillation, a flyback pulse that we didn't take into account.
That might jam up the direct test, she said, but it wouldn't account for the other reaction. If you were into the computer, of course, but that's one way, isn't it?
Gated all the way. Our setup could receive selected data from the computer, but nothing went back in. Nah, I was thinking of this storage bank here. He nodded toward the panel in front of Prudence. She turned toward the panel, puzzled.
But this is just a complicated recorder. All it does is keep track of our work, step by step. It is isolated from the rest of the computer, isn't it?
What if it isn't isolated from the rest of the computer? Timberlake asked.
But Bickle assured me.
Yeah, Timberlake said, and he probably believed it. I checked the work, too. If the schematics are correct, it's isolated. But what if the schematics are off?
Why would they be?
I don't know. But what if they are? Timberlake moved down the panel to the left, searching. He stopped at a translator output head. Easy enough to find out. I'll just sort to find out if any of that test setup got into the master banks.
If it did get in, there's no telling what it loused up, she said.
Not necessarily, Timberlake said. He began cutting a program tape, referring to the computer banks themselves for the necessary data. Presently he said, that should do it.
Within seconds, the load and go signal flashed at the readout in front of Timberlake. He switched it for an online printout and began reading the automatic translation. That was awfully fast. Oh, sorry. That was awfully fast, Prudence said. Timberlake ignored her, scanning the tape as it chattered from the printer. For Christ's sakes, he said. What is it? She asked, suppressing an irrational surge of fear. Get Bickle, Timberlake said. This damn thing is giving us the truncated readout right here. What? The answer we expected to get back at the setup if it worked. We're getting it right here, right now. That's impossible, she said. Sure is, Timberlake said. You helped program this thing. Look for yourself. He whirled, brushed past her, and headed for quarters. Prudence bent over the printout, scanned the selected bits, recognizing some of the math she had worked into the program for Bickle. With a breath-stopping sense of awe, she realized that the printout was devoid of insignificant digits. It had been weeded down to essentials. And that is probably where we are going to call it for this week. I am just going to skip around here and see if I can find a reasonable nearby chapter break. Ah, come on now. Verdammt. Don't lose the place that you wanted to keep, you fool! Yeah, we can do this in 5, no problem. Okay. So yeah, that's where we're going to call it for this week. Sorry about the really, really rough start. Some of some of the syntax and the way people talk in certain Frank Herbert novels is really baffling, and it's awfully hard swapping between voices with absolutely nothing between them. So my bad. Especially when I'm like desperately trying to remember who I set as whom. That came across as sounding a little more schizoid than I'd like, but we'll take it. Anyway, so we should have this done by the end of the month. We won't have armor done by the end of the month. We will definitely have our Beowulf read through done. Maybe we'll have Termouche done as well. I think that probably won't be, but we'll see. We'll see how many weeks I've got free. But yeah, first 2 weeks of August, I'm not going to be around. I am going to be around most of the week before, I think. Yeah? Yeah. I will know as time gets closer. Anyway, definitely the 4th to the 10th, I'm not going to be around. I might be around for the 29th of July to the 2nd of August. I'll find out. Anyway, we'll find out. So yeah, I apologize for the roughness. If you're wondering why it's so rough, and why would he even bother, it's because I do these live, unfiltered and unedited. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting theoretically at 12 noon Eastern Time, which is UTC -5. If you want to catch me live, you can do so at those times and dates. I was later today than I would have liked, but stuff happens. Otherwise, they're all up there on the YouTube channel, archived for your perusal. Usually at the end or beginning of every month, I get the playlists updated into their proper position. If it's something relatively recent you're listening to, there is a good chance it is not updated into its proper playlist yet, and you'll have to hunt around for it. Because I'm lazy. Sorry. Um, there's no point dancing around that one. I could probably find time to fit it in, but I don't, because I'm a bum. Also, I really, really don't like dealing with YouTube's interface.
all that much, in truth. It's not the worst, but it's, man, sometimes it's baffling. At any rate, I will call it there. Um, I don't know. I'm in a weird headspace right now, and I don't know why. So yeah, uh, going forward, we're reading through Armor by John Stakely, which is kind of like a more cynical Starship Troopers, uh, further fleshing out the idea of powered armor as military weapon, even though it's kind of more space operatic powered armor. It's a lot less mechanical, I guess. Um, we are reading through Beowulf: A New Translation by Maria Davana Headley, the infamous Beowulf translation that starts with bro. I think a lot of people read like the first paragraph or first stanza and are just like, nope, this is repellent. This is wrong. And I am saying, give it a chance. I think its heart is in the right place. Um, and then we're reading through Destination Void as well. Um, Once we get through Destination Void, Fridays will then be doing. On Fridays, we'll be reading through The Three Body Problem by Xixin Liu, which has a lot of Chinese names that I am guaranteed to mangle. Sorry. Um, it's also a fairly dry book, so if you find yourself falling asleep or catch me falling asleep reading it, sorry. Um, Things get a bit more exciting with the second and third volumes. Even though the second volume has some really awkward subplots that are kind of, well, actually all of them have awkward subplots where you're just kind of like, why did they see fit to include this? Anyway, uh, I I have my issues with the Three Body Problem trilogy, but mostly it's like the high concepts are sound. They're cool. Um, a lot of it is fairly cool, but the first book, I'm not going to lie to you, is a bit of a slog. It's probably worth it on balance, but it is no doubt it's a bit of a slog, and I think most people are going to find it that way. I know other people I've talked to were like, man, people keep telling me the second and third books are worth it, but geez, this is kind of miserable. And I'm like, I'm not gonna lie, kind of yeah, it kind of is. It's not too bad if you don't know the plot twist. Then it's like, oh, okay, we were working up to that, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I don't think it was worth it for the plot twist. But that kind of depends on your perspective. Anyway, it was requested, and I was like, you know what? I had fun reading them. Why not? And then I reread it, and was like, oh, that's right. We're going to be reading through it anyway, and then we're going to keep alternating between Destination Void. Well, actually, it'll be the Pandora cycle. Pandora, yes, cycle. Pandora trilogy. Pandora something. Sequence. There it is. The Pandora sequence, which is the Jesus incident, the Lazarus effect, and the Ascension factor. Um, and we're going to swap between those and going back and forth between those and the three body problem. I am not going to be reading the fourth three body problem book as it is fan fiction. Um, that isn't the only reason I'm not going to read through it, but it's the one I'm going to list here. It is well regarded fan fiction. I think most people regard it as quote canonical, but there's like, I mean, the third volume also does a bunch of retcons, but where it's like, wait a minute, when did you have time to fit this in? What? Come on. Um, but the fourth one has a couple retcons, and I'm not totally sold on them. And it's, I don't know, it rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't awful, but I was like, yeah, it's good for fan fiction, but it's definitely fan fiction. It's a romp. it's a romp, and parts of it are really good, and parts of it are like, oh boy, you really, I don't know, man. So we're not going to be reading the fourth one, but we will be doing the Ascension Factor, the fourth book of that trilogy. And after all that, I have absolutely no idea because that's going to take basically the rest of the year. Uh, that's a fact. That's going to be a while. Um, I know somebody has requested what's it called by Dan Simmons, Carrion Comfort. I have not actually had a chance to read through that one yet, so as well as stuff by Scalzi. I think it was Old Man's War, um, which I have to reread. I have to do some vetting. Um, Otherwise, like there's a path forward for Mondays. Wednesday is gonna just kind of be whatever I feel like at the time. Um, so there, or to fill in if I have to. Yeah, that's it. We're good. I have rambled enough aimlessly as humanly possible, and then some. Um, Truly, the ascension factor was my ability to ramble pointlessly for half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever. Anyway, sees you all later. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, sorry. If you did, cool. Stay safe, stay sane, and be toasty or cool as per your preference and geolocation permit, and be decent to each other. Sees y'all later. Bye.